September 14, 2007. Evening. The King's Cross station in London was bustling with the usual Friday frenzy. The hum of voices mixed with the sound of footsteps created a familiar urban chaos, while announcements over the loudspeakers added a sense of urgency. People hurried along, dragging suitcases and bags, some glancing nervously at their watches, clearly feeling the pressure of time. Amid this crowd stood 14-year-old Andrew Marshall. Andrew moved slowly along the platform, his eyes scanning the endless flow of people for something or someone. Security cameras throughout the station captured his calm, even confident, movements. In one hand, he held a small black backpack, while the other rested in his jacket pocket as if he wanted to hide his thoughts from those around him. At first glance, he looked like any of the hundreds of other passengers rushing to catch their trains. The footage shows Andrew glancing around, his gaze drifting over the platform as he studies the faces and movements of the people around him. He takes a few steps, weaving through the crowd, but suddenly, he stops. Something seems to have caught his attention. One more step and his silhouette disappears from the screen. The next cameras, positioned on nearby platforms, no longer capture him, as if he simply vanished into thin air. At this moment, Andrew's trail goes cold. It appears as if he has just disappeared, becoming part of an anonymous mass that no one notices. For the police who later review the footage, the boy's disappearance becomes one of the strangest and most unsettling mysteries. There was no panic or fear on his face. He looked like an ordinary teenager who might have been strolling through the station or waiting for someone. But from that moment on, no one saw Andrew again. The masses around him continued to move, absorbed in their own lives and concerns. No one stopped to ask where he was going. No one turned around to notice the absence of this young person. That day, London carried on with its life, engulfed in busyness and routine, unaware that among them someone had vanished, never to return. The morning of September 15, 2007, began like any other for the Marshall family. John was drinking coffee at the kitchen table while Maggie prepared breakfast. The silence in the house felt ordinary until Maggie glanced at the clock and realized their son Andrew had not yet appeared. "John, have you seen Andrew today?" she asked, placing her cup on the table. "No, I thought he was already downstairs. Maybe he's gotten lost in a book again?" John suggested, setting aside his newspaper. A few minutes later, they both headed upstairs to their son's room. The door was closed. Maggie gently knocked, but there was no answer. She opened the door. Everything looked perfectly normal, textbooks neatly stacked on the desk, the bed made, and a few drawings hanging on the wall. Everything was in its place. "Strange," Maggie said as she stepped into the room. "His phone isn't here, which means he must have taken it with him. But where could he be?" John looked around. On the desk lay a phone charger, and in the drawer was Andrew's passport, tucked beneath some notebooks. This immediately put the parents on alert. "He never goes anywhere without his charger," John said, a note of concern creeping into his voice. "And if he was planning to go somewhere, he would have taken his passport." "Do you think he stayed over at a friend's house?" Maggie suggested, but she was already sensing that something was wrong. Maggie started calling Andrew's friends. One after another, they all said the same thing. No one had seen him since the previous evening. The parents tried to reassure themselves that their son might just be running late, but their instincts told them something was more serious. Time passed, and there was still no word from Andrew. Maggie began to pace nervously around the house, glancing at her phone every few moments, waiting for a call or a message. But the phone remained silent. By the evening of the next day, their worry had turned into full-blown panic. "We need to go to the police." "John," Maggie said, her voice trembling. "This doesn't seem like him. He always lets us know if he's going to be late." John nodded, feeling that the situation was spiraling out of control. Andrew had never gone missing like this before. On the morning of September 16, the Doncaster police began the official investigation into the disappearance of Andrew Marshall. Officers arrived at the family home to gather as much information as possible. John and Maggie anxiously recounted everything they could remember. That Andrew had never before left without warning, that all his belongings were still at home, and that he hadn't told any of his friends about his plans. Inspector Harper, who was in charge of the case, asked the key question. "Did your son have any problems at school? Perhaps conflicts with classmates or teachers?" Maggie shook her head with concern. Andrew was a quiet boy. He never complained about school, he just didn't really socialize with the other kids. He always kept to himself. We thought he was more comfortable that way. Harper took note and then assigned 2 officers to check Andrew's school. That same day, the police reached out to teachers and classmates. They conducted several interviews to determine if there had been anything unusual in Andrew's behavior in the days leading up to his disappearance. Mr. Reeves, Andrew's teacher, described him as a capable and quiet student who caused no trouble. He attended all his classes and completed his homework but was withdrawn. He had no close friends and rarely engaged in conversations with his classmates. Sometimes it felt like he was somewhere far away, Mr. Reeves shared. Lost in his thoughts, even when sitting right in front of me. But there were no issues with his studies. The questioning of classmates also yielded no new information. One by one, they recounted the same thing: Andrew wasn't someone who easily made friends. He always kept to himself, spending more time with books than with others. Joshua Miller, one of the few who occasionally spoke with Andrew, remembered. He was a smart guy. Sometimes we talked about books and movies, but I can't say we were close. He was in his own world. None of the students could recall Andrew behaving oddly or mentioning plans to leave. There were no conflicts, arguments, or problems that might have pushed him to run away. This silence, as if an invisible barrier surrounded Andrew, puzzled the police. He didn't fit into any standard categories. He was neither a bully nor a victim of bullying, nor someone who would easily make enemies. The investigation had not progressed a single step. As the police began to piece together the events of the day Andrew went missing, an important detail emerged from the banking records. On the morning of September 14th, Andrew withdrew £200 from an ATM near the school. This was unusual for a teenager who typically spent money only on lunches or small purchases. Officers reviewed the surveillance footage from the ATM. Andrew appeared calm and focused, moving without any rush. There were no signs of panic or anxiety. This information raised questions for the police. Why would a 14-year-old boy need that much cash if he wasn't planning to run away? Typically, teenagers who decide to leave home take more belongings and try to prepare as thoroughly as possible. But Andrew's clothing on the day of his disappearance was casual: jeans, a sweatshirt, and sneakers. He only had a small backpack with him, hardly enough to carry anything more than a few essentials and a bottle of water. Back in Andrew's room, his parents, along with the police, carefully examined his belongings. There were no signs of preparation for a long trip. The backpack contained no change of clothes, food supplies, or personal items that would be useful on the road, just a few textbooks, a notebook, and a pen, items he typically took to school. "This is definitely not a runaway situation," John Marshall said quietly, rubbing his hands together. "If he wanted to leave for a long time, he would have taken at least something. But if this wasn't a runaway, then why did Andrew need so much cash?" That question remained unanswered. The police began to look for possible motives, checking his recent purchases and online activity, but found nothing suspicious. Maggie Marshall couldn't calm down. She sat at the kitchen table, cradling her head in her hands, whispering. He was planning something. But what? And why does he need the money? The questions continued to mount. It seemed that each new discovery only added to the mystery. On the third day of the investigation, the police were able to obtain surveillance footage from the Doncaster station. This footage was expected to be a crucial step in unraveling the mysterious disappearance of Andrew Marshall. The family hoped it would shed light on where their son might have gone and who he was with. The recordings showed the platform in Doncaster, bustling with people moving with their usual haste. At 9:30 a.m., the cameras captured Andrew approaching the ticket counter. He was wearing the same clothes described by his parents: dark jeans, a gray sweatshirt, sneakers, and a small backpack slung over his shoulders. He was alone. He purchased a ticket to London and then headed toward the train. Inspector Harper and his team closely monitored every movement of the teenager. There were no signs of fear or anxiety on his face. Andrew walked confidently, without hesitation. It seemed he knew exactly where he was going and why. He boarded the train, sat by the window, and, as the footage showed, remained still until departure. The train arrived at King's Cross Station at 5:52 p.m. The police continued analyzing the footage from the London station. Andrew stepped onto the platform among a crowd of other passengers and, just like in Doncaster, blended in seamlessly. He didn't appear troubled, nor did he look around as if he were unsure of his route or destination. Andrew crossed the platform, walking along the train cars, and at this point, the footage took a strange turn. The surveillance cameras at King's Cross captured his confident stride, but soon Andrew vanished from view. About 3 minutes after arriving at the station, he stopped being recorded by the cameras. The police meticulously reviewed all the footage from the station, but no one saw him again. There were no signs that anyone approached him. None of the cameras captured any suspicious individuals who might have been following him. Everything seemed so ordinary that even the investigators were baffled. How could a teenager simply disappear in the middle of one of the busiest train stations in London? He just melted into the crowd, Harper mused, watching the footage over and over. No traces, no leads. This disappearance appeared almost inexplicable. When the police investigation hit a dead end and questions remained unanswered, John and Maggie Marshall decided to hire a private detective. Their hope was fading with each passing day, and they could wait no longer. Enter Raymond Hayes, a man with a reputation as a tough but effective professional capable of finding answers where others had given up. Raymond Hayes was an experienced detective who had spent many years working on disappearances and complex cases that the police often dismissed. He was middle-aged, with a stern expression and a constant cigarette between his teeth. With a sharp mind and a tenacious grip, Hayes rarely shied away from difficulties, making his investigative approach unique. When Hayes arrived at the Marshall home, he immediately took charge. His quick eyes scanned the room, and he wasted no time on idle conversation. "I won't promise you miracles," he said, shaking John's hand. "But I will do everything I can to find out what happened to your son. I need every detail you have, even those that might seem insignificant to the police." The Marshalls shared everything they knew. Hayes promptly began reviewing all the previous investigation data. Unlike the police, he approached the case with meticulous attention to detail. Every minor fact, every piece of information became a potential clue. His first task was to re-watch the surveillance footage, but he didn't merely skim through it as the police had done. He analyzed not only Andrew's behavior but also the surrounding environment. Who was nearby? Who might have been on the same platform or in the same train car? Was there a possibility that someone was deliberately following Andrew? Nothing escaped his notice, even the simplest details. He noticed that Andrew apparently didn't check his phone while walking through the station, which led him to consider that perhaps the phone had been turned off even before the trip. This became his first puzzle. Hayes returned to Andrew's room, viewing it from a different perspective. He was convinced that the boy knew something or had planned something, given that he took such a large amount of cash with him. He began carefully examining notebooks, books and notes that Andrew had left behind. A seemingly ordinary math notebook might hold something more significant. This boy didn't just disappear for no reason, Hayes said, turning to John. He had something in mind, or someone pushed him into this. Raymond Hayes knew that in such cases, the small details mattered more than the large clues. His methods differed from those of the police. He didn't rely on formal procedures and standard approaches. He dug into the details, and his tenacity instilled hope. For the first time since Andrew's disappearance, his parents felt that someone might truly uncover the truth. Raymond Hayes had been methodically studying everything related to Andrew Marshall's disappearance for several days when a new witness unexpectedly came forward. A woman named Caroline Watson contacted the Marshall family after hearing about the investigation in the news. She claimed that on the day of Andrew's disappearance, she had been on the same train from Doncaster to London. When Hayes learned of this, he immediately arranged to meet Caroline. They met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Caroline was a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair and a wary expression. She looked excited and slightly nervous, but the determination on her face showed that she wanted to share her story. "I'm not sure if this will help," she began, "but when I heard about the missing boy, I realized I couldn't stay silent. I was in the same carriage as him. He was sitting just a few rows away from me." Hayes listened intently, taking notes in his notebook. "What exactly did you notice?" he asked, looking up. "At first, nothing unusual," Caroline continued. "The boy was sitting alone, looking a bit withdrawn, but he didn't stand out. I noticed a man in his 40s sitting nearby. He was well dressed and seemed quite respectable. But they exchanged glances several times, and it struck me as odd. The boy seemed a bit apprehensive, although he tried not to show it. Can you describe the man in more detail? Hayes asked, his expression growing serious. He had short dark hair, with a bit of gray at the temples. He was wearing a suit but without a tie, as if he was in a hurry and hadn't had time to tidy up. He had a newspaper with him but wasn't reading it, he kept glancing over at the boy. Hayes paused before asking his next question. Did he say anything to Andrew? Caroline shook her head. No, at least I didn't see them interact. But something about his behavior was unsettling. When the train arrived in London, the man got off almost right after the boy and vanished into the crowd. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it seems important. Hayes carefully recorded everything she had said and leaned back thoughtfully in his chair. The man in the suit could be the key to unraveling Andrew's disappearance. While the police focused on the details of the teenager's school life, this witness might point in an entirely different direction. Someone could have been following Andrew from the very start of his journey. Caroline, you did the right thing by coming to me, Hayes said quietly. Your testimony could be crucial. Now he had a new question. Who was this man, and why was he interested in Andrew? Several days had passed since Private Detective Raymond Hayes began his investigation. He was delving into the details. But it seemed that every new answer brought even more questions. The police continued their parallel investigation, and one of their meetings with Andrew's classmates led to an unexpected revelation. Joshua Miller, one of the few who had interacted with Andrew at school, finally found the courage to tell the police something he had previously deemed unimportant. His interview took place in a small office where Inspector Harper and Sergeant Green sat. Joshua was a bit nervous but spoke confidently enough. I don't know if this will help, Joshua began, fidgeting with the hem of his jacket. But a few weeks ago, Andrew started acting a bit strangely. Inspector Harper immediately perked up, leaning in closer. What do you mean? Joshua hesitated, trying to find the right words. Andrew had always been quiet, as you already know. But in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, I noticed he often left after school. Usually, he would go home or stay in the library, but suddenly he started saying he had things to do. A couple of times I tried to ask what kind of things, but he wasn't very talkative. Harper frowned and gestured for him to continue. Where did he go? He said he was meeting someone, Joshua admitted. But he never said who. I don't know who it was, and none of his friends do either. It always happened after classes, and he never lingered, he just left. Did you try to find out who this person was? Sergeant Green asked. Joshua shook his head. No. Andrew wasn't the type to share personal things easily. He was reserved, and if he didn't want to talk, he just wouldn't. We all thought it was nothing special, maybe some new job or just an old acquaintance. But now that he's disappeared, it seems important. Inspector Harper listened intently, jotting down every detail. The police realized that Andrew might have had secret meetings that neither his parents, teachers, or friends were aware of. Someone he met regularly could play a significant role in his disappearance. Joshua, Harper asked gently but firmly. Can you remember where he met this person? Did he ever mention a place or a time? Joshua paused, recalling. He never mentioned a specific location, but once, when I asked, he said it was near the school. He always left in one direction, toward the south exit, but I didn't follow. After the interview, Harper contacted Hayes to relay the information. A new thread had emerged. A person with whom Andrew had met before his disappearance. Who could this be? What were these secret meetings for? The answers might lie in what the police did not yet know. Raymond Hayes, upon hearing the news, simply nodded quietly. It seems our boy had secrets he never shared. Inspired by Joshua's new information, the police launched an active search in London. They decided to comb the area around King's Cross, hoping to find any clues that could lead them to Andrew. Every establishment, every street, every possible location underwent their careful investigation. One of the first places they headed to was a small bookstore located just a few blocks from the station. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with kind eyes, immediately remembered the young man who had come in on the day of the disappearance. Yes, I remember him, he said, rubbing his chin. He looked a bit confused but politely asked about city maps. I showed him a few, and he bought one with cash. Can you tell us exactly what he bought? Asked one of the officers. The shopkeeper knelt down, pulling out the remaining maps from under the counter and placing one before them. "Here it is. This is the map he took. Can I help with anything else?" The officers exchanged glances. The map could have marked interesting locations or routes that Andrew planned to explore. The realization that he hadn't just come to London but had a plan was a significant breakthrough. "Did he stay at the counter long?" Inspector Harper inquired. "No, just a couple of minutes," the shopkeeper replied. He quickly picked a map, paid, and left. The police thanked the man and decided to check the surveillance footage from the store. The recordings showed Andrew studying the maps, carefully selecting one, and leaving the shop. He still didn't appear anxious. He simply stepped outside as if he knew exactly where he was going. Afterward, the police began examining the map itself. They noticed it marked several locations, some touristy, others less known. This raised even more questions. Was Andrew in search of adventure, or did he really need the map for a specific purpose? Perhaps he was trying to find something important. Hayes said when informed about the discovery. "We need to figure out where he went after purchasing the map. We should check all the routes that might have interested him." The police started looking for witnesses in the places Andrew might have visited after buying the map. Every step, every new finding brought them closer to understanding where the missing boy might have gone and what had truly happened that day. The investigation continued to develop, and each new fact raised further questions. During another meeting of the investigators, one officer, Sergeant Kim, put forward an unexpected theory. Considering that Andrew was quite a reserved teenager and had unusual meetings, he began, "I'm starting to think he might have been planning something online. We know he spent a lot of time on the computer. Perhaps he was using forums or messaging apps to connect with someone." Inspector Harper, skeptical of this idea, pursed his lips. But he didn't have any problems at school. And he didn't seem like the type to seek out company online. What could have prompted such behavior? "Nonetheless, we need to check his computer and any accounts that might have gone unnoticed," Kim insisted. "Maybe he was communicating with someone who convinced him to meet up." The investigators agreed on the necessity of a thorough analysis of Andrew's computer. Soon, a team of IT specialists began examining his device. After several hours of work, they made an important discovery. Andrew's computer contained several unknown accounts on forums and messaging apps that no one had known about. Among them, 2 accounts stood out, created under pseudonyms. One of them, Lost Traveler, appeared to be a profile dedicated to travel and adventure. The messages discussed various places, travel tips, and route planning. The other account, Hidden Friend, had a more mysterious tone, with conversations on personal topics and discussions about meetings. These accounts might be connected to his disappearance. One of the specialists remarked. Lost Traveler could mean he was searching for a new place, while Hidden Friend might indicate who he was communicating with. The investigators began studying the messages and chats. In Hidden Friend, they found records of plans to meet at a specific location in London. The meeting date matched the day Andrew went missing. "We're on the right track," Harper said, unable to hide his excitement. "If Andrew was indeed meeting someone, we need to find out who it was." As they checked the information, investigators discovered that the accounts had been active up until the day of his disappearance. This finding fueled their investigation further, opening the possibility that Andrew might have been involved in something bigger than just a trip to London. Now they had a new objective: to find out who was behind these accounts and what had really happened. As the investigators began to delve into Andrew's correspondence, one contact drew particular attention: a man named Michael. He was an adult, possibly around 40 years old, and communicated with Andrew much more frequently than others. At first glance, the messages seemed innocuous, discussions about books, movies, hobbies, and shared interests. However, over time, the tone of the conversations changed. In some messages, Michael asked questions about how Andrew spent his free time and hinted at possible meetings. For example, he asked if Andrew wanted to get together when he had the chance or meet in real life to discuss their shared interests. These hints raised alarms among the investigators. "It seems he was trying to establish a closer connection," Sergeant Green noted, carefully reviewing the messages. "It's unclear what exactly Michael wanted from Andrew, but this clearly goes beyond ordinary friendship." The investigators began analyzing the entire context of the correspondence. Michael not only chatted with Andrew but also asked questions about his life, where he studied, what his hobbies were, and who he associated with. This indicated a desire to get to know the teenager better, which was concerning. Does he have any photos or any information about who he is? Harper asked, paying attention to every detail. Unfortunately, the correspondence contained no personal information about Michael, only a username and a few phrases that could seem mundane without their context. The investigators decided to try to find him on social media. They created a search request using his name and age, but Michael appeared to be hiding behind several different accounts. This made him even more suspicious. We need to find out what his true intentions are, Hayes said when informed of the findings. He might be the key to understanding what happened to Andrew. The investigators began to build a profile of Michael using information gathered from his interactions with Andrew. They compared the details of his messages with what they knew about the young man and began to suspect that this might not just be a random friendship. This connection could prove dangerous for Andrew. Following the leads, the police decided to determine whether it was possible to find information about Michael through other accounts or potential mutual acquaintances. They understood that every detail could be crucial in this convoluted story, and now their goal was clear: they needed to uncover the person who could play a key role in Andrew's disappearance. The investigators, weary from countless hours of work, finally stumbled upon what they had been searching for. In the latest analysis of Andrew's computer, they found a conversation that left them on edge. It was a message sent to Michael on the day of Andrew's disappearance, and it shed light on the situation. Andrew wrote about their planned meeting in London, specifying a time and place: a cafe near King's Cross. He seemed excited but also cautious, adding that he didn't want anyone to know about the meeting. "We're on the verge of something significant," Inspector Harper said upon seeing the message. Andrew was about to meet this person, and that might have been his final decision. The next message from Michael contained no response from Andrew. It appeared the conversation was cut off, and after that, the trail went cold. The officers were shaken by what this could mean. Did Andrew actually go to the meeting, or did he change his mind and leave? "We need to find out if Andrew actually went to the cafe," Raymond Hayes said, realizing they now had a clear objective. "We must talk to the staff at the establishment and see if anyone saw him that day." The police quickly organized a team to check the cafe. They needed to determine if Andrew had been there, and if so, with whom he had met. This discovery could be a pivotal moment in the investigation. Meanwhile, the investigators began reviewing surveillance footage in the area around the cafe, hoping to find any confirmation. Each new examination of the facts added a fresh dynamic to the investigation. But many questions swirled in their minds. What happened at the moment Andrew met Michael? Did he have any reservations about the meeting? Why did he choose that moment for his disappearance? The answers remained elusive, but every minute now felt critically important for understanding this mysterious story. The investigation reached a new level of tension as the detectives began discussing the possibility that Michael might be involved in more serious criminal activities. The scant and mysterious information about him raised further questions. One of the investigators, Sergeant Green, proposed a troubling hypothesis. If we look at his interest in Andrew and all these hints about meetings, it could be linked to something darker. She said with a heavy sigh, "I've heard of cases where teenagers became victims of human traffickers who found their targets online." This comment shocked everyone. Inspector Harper nodded, contemplating what he had heard. In recent months, news reports have frequently featured stories of young people disappearing after interacting with strangers online. This created a sense of looming danger, especially concerning such a vulnerable age group. "That's a serious theory," he acknowledged, his face taking on a grave expression. "We need to check if Michael has any connections to known criminal organizations." The investigators began gathering data on possible criminal groups operating in London. They analyzed numerous reports and documentation on missing persons, soon discovering that abductions had indeed occurred in the area where Andrew was said to meet Michael. The fear that Andrew could become yet another victim grew with every passing minute. The next step was to thoroughly investigate all available information about Michael and his accounts. The team conducted parallel inquiries, attempting to find mentions of his name in connection with other crimes. Each new discovery provided food for thought and heightened their concerns. "If he is really linked to such groups, we need to catch him before he can do anything else," Hayes stated as the analysis results began to come in. His voice was urgent, aware that time was against them. Every new revelation fueled their anxiety, and the investigation turned into a race against time. Andrew could be in danger, and the more suspicions arose about Michael, the less time they had to apprehend him. The police began setting traps and planning operations in places where Michael might appear. Now that they suspected criminal intentions, they understood that their actions needed to be swift and decisive. Andrew's fate could depend on whether they could uncover and prevent the potential threat before it was too late. A sense of urgency gripped the team, and each member realized they had to act resolutely to save the young boy from impending danger. Months had passed since Andrew Marshall disappeared. Despite the efforts of the police and private detective Raymond Hayes, the case had stagnated. Numerous searches, interviews, and checks for potential evidence yielded no results. Then, at the most unexpected moment, a new development reignited hope. One evening, a call came into the police station about a newly discovered recording from a security camera at Gatwick Airport. Officers began reviewing the footage and soon stumbled upon a blurry video showing a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Andrew. In the recording, he stood at an exit, holding a bag and looking somewhat anxious. Inspector Harper and his team leaned closer to the monitor, intently watching the screen. Although the quality of the footage was far from perfect, they could not deny that the young man's features indeed resembled Andrew's. However, it was clear that confirming his identity would be difficult. "We need to find out when this was taken," Harper said, scrutinizing the frames. "It could just be a coincidence. But we must explore every possibility." The investigators analyzed the timestamp of the recording and compared it with other missing persons cases. They discovered that the footage had been recorded just days after Andrew's disappearance. This revelation filled their hearts with renewed hope, but it also raised new questions. If this is really Andrew, where could he be going? Hayes wondered. And what was he doing at the airport? They immediately contacted Gatwick's administration, requesting additional data on passengers who left the airport that day. Each new piece of information became critically important, and the investigators understood that they had a new lead in the case. However, the blurry video left many gaps. Could the police confirm the identity of the young man? Was it indeed Andrew, and if so, why was he at the airport? These questions weighed heavily on the investigators, but they were now determined to find answers. This new clue fueled their determination, and the police began to act again, hoping to finally track down the missing teenager. Time had once again become their ally, and they were ready to move quickly to uncover what had really happened to Andrew Marshall. The next day brought an unexpected turn in the investigation. A witness who had been at Gatwick Airport on the day the footage was recorded contacted the police. He claimed to have seen a young man resembling Andrew near a man who also looked like Michael, the stranger from the messages. Seemingly under pressure from this new revelation, investigators quickly organized a meeting with the witness to gather more information. He described the situation as follows. "I was in a cafe nearby and noticed them. The young guy looked confused, and this man was clearly trying to calm him down. They were talking, and it seemed like something was off." The witness's words sparked a renewed sense of hope and anxiety among the police. They now had a chance to see how Andrew interacted with someone who could be linked to his disappearance. Investigators immediately began reviewing footage from other cameras in the airport, searching for additional evidence. They requested access to recordings that captured every corner of the airport, including exits, cafes, and waiting areas. Every frame could prove crucial. As they searched for clues, Raymond Hayes' team continued to analyze data about Michael, trying to find any connections he had to the airport or criminal groups. It became a race against time. The faster they gathered information, the quicker they could protect Andrew if he was still in danger. Soon, investigators discovered footage of a young man very similar to Andrew alongside a man next to him. The recording was blurry, but the images were clear enough to confirm their interaction. "This is no longer just a coincidence," Harper said, staring at the video. "We need to urgently identify who this man is and what his connection to Andrew might be." The investigators began to correlate the time and place, cross-referencing the information with earlier data. Each new discovery brought them closer to understanding what really happened that day at the airport. With every step, they realized they were getting closer to unraveling the mystery of Andrew's disappearance. Despite all the investigators' efforts, the investigation reached a complete dead end. Every new discovery, every lead stalled, and all attempts to locate Andrew proved futile. The recordings from Gatwick Airport had provided hope, but it soon became clear that the young man's trail ended as soon as he left the premises. Investigators continued to check possible routes, analyze all available data, and interview witnesses, but each time they faced the same problem: there wasn't enough evidence to move forward. The man resembling Michael disappeared along with Andrew, and attempts to identify him were unsuccessful. Andrew's family, John and Maggie Marshall, did not lose hope. Every day, they continued to dream of a miracle. They spent hours listening for the phone, wishing for their son's return. Photographs of Andrew remained on the walls of their home, now serving as reminders that their lives had changed forever. Time passed, taking days, weeks, and months with it. One day, Maggie, exhausted from the constant struggle, sat down to write a letter expressing all her feelings and hopes addressed to Andrew. She hoped that this letter would somehow reach him. Meanwhile, the investigation was suspended. The police continued to monitor for possible leads, but the case grew cold. Each new day brought less information, and no new theories could mislead the investigators. While everyone searched for Andrew, his name became known. The community, unwilling to forget the missing boy, organized events to raise funds for continued searches. The faces of his family and friends remained in the spotlight, reminding everyone that each disappearance is not just a statistic, but a real tragedy that impacts many lives. John and Maggie continued to believe that one day they would see their son again, even as everything pointed to the possibility of losing him forever. Their faces showed signs of fear, but also of hope. No matter how the situation unfolded, they knew their love for Andrew would never fade, and they would continue to fight for him. Years after Andrew Marshall's disappearance, his case remained unsolved. Andrew's name was added to the long list of missing persons, and while time marched on, his memory lived on in the hearts of those who loved him. In the town, people occasionally remembered his disappearance, and flyers with his photo still adorned the walls of public places. The family continued to live with the unbearable void left by Andrew's absence. John and Maggie tried to maintain a normal life, but every holiday, every moment of joy was overshadowed by the thought that their son was not there. They participated in various events, helping other families facing similar losses, but found no solace for themselves. Detective Ray Hayes also did not forget this case. Over the years, he shifted to other investigations, but the memory of Andrew always lingered in his mind. He periodically returned to the old evidence, reviewing recordings and materials, hoping to stumble upon something that could shed light on the teenager's disappearance. One day, in his office, he reopened the folder on Andrew's case. Inside were all the old notes, reports, and documents gathered over the years of the investigation. Hayes picked up a photo of Andrew, captured during one of the bright moments of his life, a backdrop of a joyful day full of hope and dreams. Ray understood that the case had stalled, but he was not ready to give up. He continued to explore new evidence and revisit the already examined, searching for connections that may have gone unnoticed. Questions swirled in his mind. Where did Andrew go? Why didn't he return? Who was the man he was meeting? For Ray Hayes, Andrew's disappearance became more than just a case, it became a personal mission. He hoped that one day he would return to this case when new information surfaced and could find the answers that had never been provided to the family or the community. Every time he heard about cases of new missing persons, Hayes felt that his work was not finished. Andrew Marshall was not just a name on a list, he was a reminder of the importance of not losing hope and continuing to seek the truth, even when everything around seemed hopeless.